unscannable 33.
So the four kind of brief headings under which this kind of headline, kind of radicalising multiplier phrase was organised were these. First of all, we thought that they created demonologies. They allowed extremist groups to basically harden in-group, out-group distinctions. And through this, basically they acted on a very well-evident social psychological phenomenon of sinister attribution error. Sinister attribution error is the idea that close-knit groups often misinterpret all events outside the group as being overly directed to the group itself. This takes form, for instance, in the various ways in which groups construct conspiracies against their particular group themselves. And we saw this very broadly and very clearly across all different types of extremism. It also fed into what we called a kind of self-aggrandizing siege mentality. So if you have this sinister attribution error, and you have the whole world, government, intelligence agencies, all directed to try and destroy this group, and you have conspiracy theories already acting to harden in-group, out-group distinction, you have the idea that the group is both very important, has to be hived off from the rest of society, and, as I've just said, is subject to sinister plots to try and disrupt or destroy the group itself. The second way in which conspiracy theories had an interesting and important impact is through acting to delegitimise voices of dissent, defection, and moderation within the group itself. We saw groups all the way from the BNP over to al-Qaeda using conspiracy theories to justify voices within the group which either called steer away from a violent kind of radical ideology, to delegitimising their rhetorical claims for the rectitude of attacks on civilians. Like, the function is quite clear and simple. Essentially, conspiracy theories are used for group leaders to allege that voices of dissent within the group are disinformation agents, are placed there by security services, are essentially complicit in attempts to disrupt and destroy the group. The third way in which conspiracy theories had an impact was in what we argue to be essentially a turn to violence, which is both rhetorical and actual within the group dynamic. The way this worked was that conspiracy theories essentially created the kind of sense within the group that, propaganda le fait, the idea that a spectacular attack, a spectacular act of violence would be necessary to shake the kind of slumbering masses, the sheeple, the benighted many out of their kind of acquiescence to the overweening authorities, which through various conspiracies have obviously placed them in this kind of uncritical kind of sleep. And a spectacular attack was necessary to kind of shake them awake. And also the idea of vanguardism, a kind of phenomenon we see very prevalent across many different violent groups. The idea that only a tight-knit group of essentially professional revolutionaries totally willing to commit violence, are necessary to break apart the unjust and oppressive status quo. Now, the fourth impact we saw didn't really pertain to the groups themselves, but it had to do with the way in which conspiracy theories on a broader kind of social level absolutely demolish trust in government and its agencies. And in many ways, actually, our discussions and since the report has been released has really focused and revolved on this particular point. The idea that we have a kind of growing, increasingly influential cultural phenomenon in this country, and indeed not only in this country but worldwide, to react to any official pronouncement, to react to orthodox media, academic journals, spokesmen, commentators, experts, with this instant knee-jerk, cynical kind of dismissal. This idea that actually conspiracy theories are acting as a paradigm in which these groups, or people more broadly, actually interpret events, demolishes, drives a vast wedge of distrust. And I mean, we mentioned the ways in which every kind of major kind of counter-terrorism arrest and indeed terrorism attack in pretty much anywhere, all the way from Pakistan to Netherlands to Canada to here, all have birthed a kind of constellation of conspiracy theories around them. All of them are in some sense, either false flag attacks or deliberate kind of disinformation, like media management ploys by the governments at work. essentially utterly delegitimising the role of the intelligence bureaucracy, agencies or police in keeping their community safe. And actually we mentioned how this was damaging, this kind of social level distrust is damaging when we look at kind of community level kind of preventive violent extremism approaches, which I mean, we don't know how this is going to pan out in the Conservative government, but which certainly animated the most important thrust in security policy under the Labour government. So those were the four broad headings, which I'm sure we'll return to at various points in our discussion. I'm now just going to go over quickly and describe the conclusions and the recommendations which we arrived at. I mean, the most important recommendations, which really populated almost all the kind of publication, was the idea of milieu changing. Was the idea that the only way in which we can really rebut conspiracy theories are to change the milieu in which they're received. And we thought really only the ways of doing this are for government to become more transparent, to become more open, for intelligence agencies. What the media took, the media line on this, was that intelligence agencies have to become more open in order to combat some of the massive distrust which we're seeing in very hardened across lots of different communities in the UK. We said there should be regular intelligence pronouncements, which should be formalised and depoliticised. We said that the culture of secrecy, which still animates the Foreign Office, MI5, MI6 in this country, police, has to go. There has to be a presumption to publish, a presumption for maximum disclosure, and that arguments have to be very powerful for not disclosure to prevent their publication. We also argue that actually kind of Web 2.0, like social media use, has far kind of outpaced what we think to be the education and critical skills which people are receiving today. We think that young people especially have been bombarded day in, day out with what we call counter-knowledge. That's misinformation packaged to look like truth, and that they're not equipped with the critical skills necessary to adequately discriminate between viable truth claims, credible truth claims, and many imposters. We also, and I think this is one of the topics of the talk tonight, said that recommended open infiltration. And actually, I'm willing to concede, actually, I mean, this was met by a fair howl of outrage in various groups in the country, and indeed in other countries too. And I'm willing to concede that I don't think we specified acutely enough the conditions in which this open infiltration was to take place. Open infiltration, what we meant by this is that there's a very well-evidenced social psychological phenomenon called group extremity shift. Group extremity shift is the idea that when lots of people get together and discuss any topic really, and they all have a leaning one way or the other, that discussion and that kind of in-feeding kind of cooperation takes the whole group to a position which is more extreme than what they started at. So when you have particular groups, either virtual or physical, who information and there's no kind of dissenting voices, we can confidently expect some kind of group extremity shift to be taking place. Now, our recommendation for open infiltration was meant to basically say that government employees, government agents, should openly acknowledge who they are, but go into situations where group extremity shift should be taking place in order to introduce information and arguments which would run contrary to the prevailing kind of orthodoxy within that group. We think that this should be, I think this should be done in very acute cases where we're sure that group extremity shift is happening, and where there's a kind of clear case that groups are moving towards violence and the support for radical violence ideologies. I think that wraps it up.
Okay, so let me, can I say, I want to say something about the response very briefly.
Yes.
So there you have it. What we are arguing for, essentially, is greater transparency in government, including in counter-terrorism agencies, more critical thinking amongst young people, and a greater emphasis on teaching young people critical thinking on the net in particular, because there is a flurry of nonsense and rubbish on there that I'm sure you've all seen. And yet the national curriculum does very little to at least allow people to be able to criticise some of this stuff and to engage with it properly. And then finally, open infiltration, which is nothing more than saying, if government is going to go into these places and start putting out different information and differing dissenting voices, well, it should just do so openly rather than fueling more conspiracies by saying, I'm a government agent, I work on this, and this is the facts. Go and look for yourself. Now, let me tell you what the response to this paper was. And this is why I have a problem with conspiracy theories. And I openly accept that. The paper was not about the 9/11 truth movement. It was about the role of conspiracy theories within extremist groups. You wouldn't know it from looking at the response because very few people engaged with the paper at all. What they did was immediately misrepresent what the paper was about. There were dozens and dozens of accounts saying that Demos is trying to close down free speech, destroy free speech. It's an agency pushing government propaganda to try to destroy any dissenting voices. It's rubbish. We never said that at any point in the paper whatsoever. Secondly, many of the groups began to use it to sort of big themselves up. Oh my goodness, the government has set Demos onto us. We must be onto something, people. Keep looking, keep going. But this is absurd as well. I think it's massively overestimating the importance and the role, and I'd say this advisedly, of my organisation. We weren't put onto conspiracy theories by the government or any rubbish like that. We decided to write it ourselves, and we accept it's going to have a limited impact. But the idea that groups have taken this to somehow prove that it's part of a government counter-misinformation campaign to destroy them is nonsense. I've got two more things to say, and then please feel free to jump in. Thirdly, the conversation very quickly turned to Demos as an organisation, to try to discredit Demos, to say that somehow we were part of a massive conspiracy to keep this all under wraps. So very quickly you started seeing sites dedicated to proving links between Demos and this and that, and Demos is an Illuminati-controlled organisation. Because Demos has an I in the logo of the O, because it's a Greek letter, and that proves that we are somehow Illuminati-controlled. And again, this is complete and utter nonsense. And then finally, they started turning on me personally, and I have a wonderful poem written about me, proving that I'm an MI5 agent, and a Zionist, and whatever else you want to say. And this is completely absurd.
Yes, we haven't done that. We've invited you to...
You haven't done that, but I want to talk about the... I'm not saying that this group here has done that, but I'm talking about the general response to our paper by many, many individuals. Now, conspiracy theories, I understand, have a wide range of, I guess, strengths, if you like, and some are more credible than others. But in terms of the response, that was the overwhelming response.
Not to mention like vitriolic personal attacks against us.
Well, we always get that on both sides. But before throwing it open to questioning, can I ask you a bit about the methodology? Because you said nothing on that.
Yep.
The way you selected the conspiracy theory groups, because most of them are either not in this country or over, not current. And secondly, your tests of significance and your statistical data, and also the means by which you got the information from within those groups, and what you mean by close-knit groups, and which ones were close-knit, how close-knit, how did you measure that, and how close-knit is the 9/11 truth movement?
Sorry, as we're pondering that, can I ask someone for maybe some paper and a pen?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to find it difficult to keep track of all of
it
this.
is, well, methodology, which you list out to go for.
Yes.
Okay. So the research paper, as you'd have seen, was written explicitly as almost as a provocation paper. It was relatively short. It was based on between 2 and 3 months' worth of work, and we didn't claim anything other. We selected between, I think, in total 60 or 70 quite high-profile terrorist/extremist groups, and we spoke to some people, some academics, to discuss the definition of extremist groups. So we didn't include the 9/11 Truth Movement in our analysis. No, we said the 9/11 Truth Movement is an example of a conspiracy theory group that does not turn violent. Didn't mean we analysed it and looked at it in detail. When we tabulated the different groups, we actually looked at overwhelmingly groups that had turned to violence, so high-profile terrorist organisations, with some exceptions, and the reason is you can't really talk about
Unscannable 33.